So start. So I want to welcome everybody back. Today, what we're going to be talking about is in the R4DS book, chapter 25, functions. And Stephan has graciously accepted the role of leading us through that discussion today. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and we'll go from there.
Hey, awesome. Thanks, Colin. Let me just share my screen. Can you see it? Yeah, okay, excellent. Yeah, I think we recently have been just working on the exercises, right? So we're not gonna go through the content one by one, but the topic today is functions. And I think the major aspect of functions, let me just pull up that slide. Here they automate repetitive tasks, so that's really nice. Have a name that makes the purpose very clear. I've been thinking a lot about computer science in general, and abstraction is a big topic in computer science. And having a good name is like worth a lot because then you don't have to think about it. If the thing works, you have almost like a black box as long as it does what you need it to do. So if it has a good name, it's a very powerful way to write code faster. And then you only need to update the code in one place as things change. So that also falls into the principle of don't repeat yourself. So keep your code dry, DRY. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind when you notice that you copy the same kind of snippet again and again. Like here in the book, it says if you copy it 2 times, there's probably times to make it into a function. And you don't run as much into any copy paste errors, or like sometimes you have to adjust some part of when you copy paste, right? And then if you forget something, then your code won't work as expected. And I think there's an example in the book where it's like, oh, did you notice that one of the variable names didn't change?
Hmm.
So that is kind of really valuable because that really is always unexpected. I don't know if this is too far away, but if you use like a pipeline workflow, like with targets that some people are using, then you kind of wrap everything into functions too. So functions are very helpful in that regard too. And sometimes it makes your code also just cleaner. So even if you don't repeat it a lot, like having, as I said, that name, it can be kind of nice to have a code and it's like, oh, clean data set. And you do that's the one function that cleans the data set. And then plot data set. And that's the other function. And that makes the entry point much easier. And then if someone really needs more context, they can look at the function definitions to help you understand it. So they're very powerful, very helpful. I actually, before I used targets, I didn't do much with functions because I, was just writing my scripts, and that was just mostly organized that way. And only when I noticed repetitive stuff, then I had to do functions. But I feel like often when you have like very basic data cleaning tasks, there's often not as much repetition. At least in my workflows, I didn't encounter it much. Okay, so let's look at the exercises, and I don't know if all of them are really that interesting. So the first one was practicing to change some code snippets, and come up, I think, also with the function names. So let me just go to the original one. Here it's taking the mean of all the missing values. So it's a proportion of missing values. Then this would be the proportion of that, whatever you're checking for. And then here's the percentage. That's my interpretation. I don't know if anyone else has an interpretation. And I find giving names very hard. And I tend to give extremely long names. So I am like, I don't care. I have autocomplete and that's fine. But I could see other people. I don't work much with other people directly looking at my code. So I don't know how tedious this makes it because some of my function names are so long. Okay. But I think it's not worth talking here much more. I did some check here to see if the stuff works. But we did the proportion missing, proportion, just the calculation, then percentage was the other one. Does everyone else agree with that? Did anyone else do the exercises? Does that make sense?
Yeah, those look pretty straightforward. I think there's extra conversation around like naming of stuff, but that's based on your code style and the people that you work with. I lean towards explicit names.
Hmm.
I advocate for DJ and people on my team to have explicit names. I know there's certain contexts, especially like when you're talking about like computer science, and then like actually writing functions to be performant and writing minimize functions. Totally understand that case, but in my experience with like analysis code, it's better to be more explicit than it is to be like succinct. So, but that's just my viewpoint on it. But everything else that you have here, it's just basically you're dumping it into a function, you're identifying the common pattern, dumping it into a function, and then abstracting that away into an argument. So, but that's where I came across as well.
Yeah. And I also like the general pattern they recommend to have a verb that describes what you do. And then if you're clever with your argument names, you can read it that way, then your function name doesn't get as long. Yeah, it depends on the context. Yeah. Okay, then here is the second question, and I don't know if this is the
Mm,
best solution. In the second variant of rescale, infinite values are left unchanged. So that was one of the examples in the book. And then can we rewrite the rescale basically rescales out of a value, so it's between 0 and 1. And so it's called rescale 0, 1. But infinite values were just kept in. And can we rewrite it in a way that infinite minus infinite is 0 and plus infinite is mapped to 1? And I just used here the case match function from the dplyr package. I don't know if that's the best way. I know you can also do use base R to do that assignment, but that is what I used. So you basically, this is all from the original function in the book. And then this part is like I take x, and then if x is minus infinite, assign it 0. And then if it's infinite, it's just assign it 1. And if it's none of the two, then just keep x. That's
mhm.
basically it. I don't know. Any other, I don't think it's as are there more elegant solutions than this? I was just using the plier because we've been working with it.
I thought initially, because basically what you're doing is you're just taking that explit. You're okay, so you're doing all your calculation to rescale it, get this
Yeah.
value X, and then you're just converting that output into something. So I maybe thought like a conditional, you could probably do that. I think maybe like if
Oh.
negative n or an if else or something, like if else, you could
Yeah.
possibly do this to convert it, is the other thought that I thought, but I think the
Oh,
case
and
match. Go
you could
ahead.
also do a case when, right? And have this as the first case if it's not the other two cases.
Yeah, I kind of cheated a little bit and looked at like the solution guide on some of these, and that's what they used was case when.
Okay.
Um, but I don't know. I thought at first I initially thought like a conditional would work here, like if else, but then I think either of these work, but I think this is a little bit more succinct to do case match or use case when. Um, 'Cause it's a little bit more succinct than actually writing out like the conditional or the if else conditional brackets and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Um, so then
it
here, sorry.
it's interesting to me. So like if you scroll up, it's really interesting to me in this chapter, and maybe this is more of an advanced topic, but I liked how they organized it in like, okay, you have these three different function styles you could write. You could write a vector function, a data frame function, or a plot function, which is very it has a very utility thing. But the thing that I was missing was, and I think this was probably in the first version of the book, was like the definition of a function, input and output. And I thought that was kind of missing. Like you have an input, you have an output, and that's like the basic thing for a function. And I think that's something that was missing, especially it's emphasized in this exercise, is like what actually gets outputted, and it is the last thing that gets processed. And that is like when in your example here with like dplyr case match, it's X that is actually getting returned. And so I don't know if that was just like if they were trying to make the chapter a little bit more accessible using as
Oh,
like
interesting.
examples of utility. But when I remember when I first read R4DS, the first version, it was like the
Yeah.
function is really simple. It's inputs and outputs. And so I thought that was kind of missing. And I think that was like an important emphasis that needed to be made.
That's true, and it doesn't explicitly tell you that the last line gets returned if you don't return anything yourself. Right? Because you can also use return as a command, right? And then return that specifically, but you don't need to because the last thing that's evaluated and within the function is the thing that gets returned. Um, and it's also worth knowing you don't want an assignment operation then, because if you call the function, then you always get some you don't see that it doesn't show you the input right away. Is that correct, right? That's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean like I think you're spot on. And I think like you can assign things. Well, I think the other thing that's missing is, and I mean, I know they're not trying to get super advanced with this, but like the idea of like inside of a function, it has its own scope, right? X, how you're defining it here in the function, like, well, you have X as the argument, but then like when you have X inside of the function, that is its own thing. It does not outside of it, outside of that function, R has no understanding of what that is unless it's inside of the function. And so I thought that was kind of an important point that was missing as well as like that X only exists once you do that calculation inside of the function. And it only is going to exist outside of it if it gets outputted from the function. And then you do an assignment outside or whatever using your function. Um,
Oh, and they also don't talk about that. It's actually a bad habit to have a global variable inside of your function because you cannot assume that it exists, right? You have to be careful with the scope. Yeah, yeah.
which
They
was
don't go
also,
very
oh, go
deep.
ahead, go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Sorry, which was also.
And it's getting ahead of me because I did see this, and I don't know if this was like bad style or they were advocating for it because like you made the mention of like global variables, but when they talk about data frame functions, they made the suggestion of like if this is like a data frame that you consistently use, you can use the function. And I was like sitting there, I was like, I don't know. It made sense from like a utility perspective, but I always remember when I first started learning this, people were like, yeah, don't reference global variables and functions. So
I think
I don't
in
know. That was
the
when you brought that up, that was interesting.
in a term of a data set, I remember that too, and I thought it's always like I remember that too, and was also surprised. But you could argue if it's a data set that's part of a library, then you can kind
Mm.
of maybe that's the same library where this function might also live in. Then you could argue it just cuts out the middleman, or you could maybe have a default value, which that would have been my solution. You just
Hmm.
df equals whatever the data frame is, and then you get it if you don't specify the data frame. But I don't know. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's good practice.
And
Okay.
I didn't want to derail the conversation, but you brought up return as well.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't want to like harp on this because I feel like I'm dominating the conversation, but um, I am an advocate for using return at the end of your functions in every case because it just makes it very clear what you're returning. I know it's not needed, but it's just really nice to see what is the final thing that is getting returned. And so the style guide that I advocate for like the team that I work with is like you always explicitly use return because you know exactly what's getting returned and you're not assuming that it's the last value. So, but that's like the last point I wanted to make,
Mm.
but not the style decision. It's not, it
Th-
doesn't have to work for everybody, but it's just a decision that I've fell
That's
on.
really interesting. I don't know. The Tidyverse style guide, I think they don't have returns. It explicitly say don't have a return at the end of a function. I
Hmm.
don't remember the argument why. you have to be careful when you have a return, right? You have to be to
Mhm.
basically make sure you move it down if you add any code at the bottom. But if that's your um, standard style, maybe that you just always pay attention to it. Yeah, that's interesting. I would be hard pressed to argue beyond style if there's certain advantages or disadvantages. For me, it's always like the return that almost tells you, from what I remember, the impression I get from the tidyverse style guide is like it's exceptional cases, right? You do like an if statement, and then if
Mhm.
that is not fulfilled, you get an error or warning, whatever, and then you return earlier or yeah, in if statements that makes often sense to have returns, and so I
Mhm.
feel like they advocated for that. And then you basically the flow is, oh, you see a return, something special happened. If not, you just assume the last thing is returned.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah, okay. I don't feel like this derails at all. I feel like these are interesting conversations that we're having. So just so. Um, Okay, and then here I realized that I didn't read the lubricate chapter as carefully as I thought I did because I was like, I don't remember anything anymore how to do this. So this was get age in years is the function. That we were supposed to create a function that tells us how old someone is in years today. And so there was actually an example for Hadley's birthday, I think, in the lubricate chapter. So you get just the today date and subtracted birthday of someone else. Here I was being very lazy. I just assume it's in a YMD format. I think there's a more flexible interpreter from lubricate that kind of tries to guess, I think, what your date format is. So I was being lazy. This is not a very robust function, is what I'm trying to say. Then you had to convert it to as a duration because I think lubricate does everything in seconds. So that converts it into seconds. The other one I think is, what is it? Days? Yeah, days, I
Mhm.
think. And then you have to divide it by the number by the duration of years here of 1 year, and then I floored it. There was also a floor function in lubricate, but I felt like that didn't work as well. I don't remember anymore when I wrote this function. Does that look about right, or have other people very different things?
Yeah, I kind of leaned on lubricate a little bit as well. Um, but then I was like, I was getting kind of stuck on it because I kind of had to remember the lubricate stuff. And then I unfortunately didn't have enough time to kind of dig into it. And I was like, I can't figure this one. I'll skip it. I will say that when I looked at the solution guide, they have like a very wild one using a very different operator that I've seen. And they also use a Modolo to do it. I mean, I could pump it into the chat for people to see like how this person had
Uh,
addressed it. It's crazy. I would have never thought about
Modoro makes sense.
doing it
That
this
makes so
way.
much sense because you can because then you don't have to floor afterwards, right? Then you can just
Yeah.
get rid of this part. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was playing around with Lubric like you were doing, like take the today minus the year month day. And then I couldn't figure out like looking at the duration part of it was what I probably was missing. But then when I looked at it, when I was looking at like the solution of this person, I was like, oh, the Modolo makes sense. You can Modolo by years and then it will give you. So I'll just pump it in the chat so you can kind of see it. But it was interesting how this person did this, but I wasn't familiar with this like percent dash dash percent operator. So
Why is it years and not duration of years? Uh, because this is all Labradate. Oh, this thing. I see. Okay. Yeah, I've never seen that before. Okay.
I've never seen this before. It was crazy.
Well, is this in the, let me just search in the R for data
It-
science book because I've never seen this.
I've never seen that one before.
Time spans.
Oh, okay.
Where is it
Because this
though?
is what I went back to this too, and I was like, okay, Hadley had this example, and I was like, okay. take the year minus whatever, whatever, but
An interval. Okay.
because you have YMD. Well, because doesn't YMD on the back end just convert it into a Unix timestamp? Is that what it does? Well,
It's date format. Is that a Unix one? It is. I'm not sure, but it's a date. Uh, um, maybe we
I
can
think it
just.
represents it. I think it represents it as a date, but I think on the back end it's represented as like an interval or a integer, right? Representing the Unix timestamp.
I see. Let's just see what UT say. I know that's the time. I don't see anything else. Okay. Yeah. How would I see how it's represented?
That is a great question. Mm,
Is this, by the way, big enough? I didn't even ask if the font is big enough. I turned it up a
looks
little
good to
bit earlier.
me.
Looks good. Okay, good.
What would you
Um,
know? How would you know if that is a timestamp, a Unix timestamp?
is it
Um,
class the
'Cause
function?
that's
Yes.
yeah, you could try class Y Liberty today. So
It
it's a
says just
date,
date. Okay.
last date. Um, that's a great question. I have
Because
a
then it's
feeling
not that then it's not POSIX, whatever the thing is. It must be derived, right? Because POSIX would otherwise it would say, isn't that POSIX, POSIX, the Unix or the Linux version?
I think that's
Um,
how it's represented.
yeah. Okay. Anyway, so you can get just the interval directly with this thing. Okay. And then you can basically skip this part to convert it into a duration. I still don't understand why just taking the years function versus the. But when I read this over again, I was kind of with the periods and intervals, it kind of threw me. So what does year to return? Oh, the year function is actually more specific.
Oh, that's right. Because it accounts for leap years, right?
But then depending on when I run that function, it would change what I get as a result, strictly speaking, right?
Hmm.
If it would be more precise. So I actually using years is bad here because it makes your code less reproducible. Because then this would always depend on what year you run it.
Oh, that
I
is true.
assume, right? Or what would it use as the um, but I'm speculating here. I'm just seems anyway. Okay, let's not get too hung up on this. But okay, so there's a much more elegant version of this. That's great. And then I looked up the variance in skewness, and then I did not know how to calculate skewness, and I didn't spend more
Mm.
time on implementing that. I think my variance though is correct. So I don't know if that's really that interesting to show, and it seemed to work. So I was using my variance function versus the other one, and then compared the result of those two, and that was at least for my one example, which is of course the best exhaustive testing that I've ever done. It seemed to give me the same result. So that seems to work. Um, And then there's a function called write both a summary function that takes two vectors of the same length and returns the number of positions that have an a in both vectors. And so what I just did is I checked if is an a and is an a because those both are vector functions anyway. So they return you true and false, and we want only the ones that are true both. So I have here the and
Mm.
then I take the sum of it, and that seems to work.
That's that is that's super succinct. I like that one. Okay.
What is the
So
version you saw? Sorry, go ahead.
um this one I kind of skipped over because I spent a lot of time on looking at like the tidy evaluation ones.
Hmm.
The one that I've seen uses like which and intersect and length, but this is so much more succinct because okay, so I'm just trying to see here. So is NA, and
Because
you
here it
have
says it would,
the ampersand, which would be
yeah,
returns the number of positions. Okay,
because it's asked for the number of positions and not the positions themselves, right? Because
that's
initially
right.
I
Yep,
read it as the positions and I was like, oh, then I need a which because then it tells me where the truths are.
yep,
But that's not the same case. So you can just, but I mean, the difference would be just switching this to a which, I think, and then you will get the same result.
yep.
Then it would give you the positions themselves.
Yep, that's what I was wondering was because that's the other question I had was like, and that's what kind of confused me was like, was it looking for me to identify the position of where they're at in these two vectors, or is it just trying to do the count?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. One
So
and
this seems to
four,
work 1 and 4. So that
one
works.
and four are the same. That's yeah, that's cool. That's really cool that he came up with that because then sum would be the total, right? So if you
Yeah.
did sum, that's cool. That's really okay. I never would have thought of doing it that way. That's because the thing that threw me for a loop, okay, and it goes back to that conversation of like a function takes in inputs and returns one output, or in general, that's what it does. And so the idea of like inserting two vectors to give one output was what was confusing to me because technically you have two inputs, one output, and then I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I, but you're only trying to match either positionally or total where in those vectors they both have an NA. And so it is just
Yeah.
one output. So, and it's returning one vector. Okay. That's cool. That is really cool. I might have to steal this. I don't know where I'm going to use this, but I might have to steal this from you as the solution because that's really neat.
Thank you. Um, okay, and then the last one was read the documentation to figure out what the following functions do. Why are they useful, even though they are so short? And then I gave it a different
Mm,
name. So here, file info of a path gives you all kind of information. If we look up the documentation here, you can see, what does it say? Here, size is steer, mode, and then here's here's the POSIX CT. Look at that. And so you get this part of it, and then is it a file or a directory? So I called this is directory as a
mm.
function. Maybe there's a greater name. So to express that one. And then the other one is readable. And actually the file access, I think it's a typical, isn't that a typical shell thing where it gives you a 0 if there's no error, and if it's a 1, then there's an error. Is that correct? Is that how shell works? I always forget the standard input, output stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because I was looking at that too as like the file access, like the is directory made sense. It's just giving me a true or false. But I was trying to
Yeah,
remember for file.access if it's actually looking at like because isn't it within the shell when you look at it has like the different ways if it's readable or
yeah.
accessible. And so like what this is doing is it's like saying file.access is like take the file, get the fourth, which is what the fourth is
That's for
test
read
for
permission.
read permission,
Yeah. And then
which
it
takes
returns you as, and I tested it. It returns you a 0 if it's readable. And so
mm,
that's what it doesn't return you true or false. It returns a 0 if it's readable. And I didn't test if it returns you a 1 if it's not readable, but that's why here it tests for equality. So if this
mhm.
is if the file is readable, then it's 0, and then if you equal to 0, then it returns true if it's readable. So that's
Yeah,
why I called it this.
because it says here the mode value can be the exclusive or XOR, which is like the representation of like when you like just go to when you go to your shell and you type ls la all that stuff, it gives you the XOR or whatever it is, because X is you can do everything. O is only view. Yeah. Well, no, if you do LA, yeah, see the on the left side there,
Yeah,
you have DR. That's what I was think it was pulling is the information with that, I
yeah,
think. So,
yeah, yeah. Anyway, the important part, I think, from this is, oh yeah, an integer vector with value 0 for success and -1 for failure. And here it says, I should have just looked what the value is. Okay, so 0 is success, it's readable. -1, it's a failure. So that's why you have to add this. You have to be basically careful if you want a true false outcome, if the function returns a true or false, and if not, then you have to just add some condition to get a true false, is what's happening here.
nice.
And then it was asking why are they useful, and I just said it's useful for if statements to make sure to check conditions, right? Before you write to something, you make sure it's actually, I don't know, it's a directory you want to write your file to. I don't know why you would get that confused. And the other thing, is it readable? Like before you start reading a file, you can basically get kind of exception or something, and it gives you a meaningful error message, right? So, oh, you cannot actually access the file. That might be very meaningful. I don't know if you do like more stuff on a server or something, and you actually don't have the access to the file.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think. Okay, so that's this, and we're going very slow. So I don't know if we should just pick up the speed here a little bit. So here's the whole using a data set, write a function that finds all flights that were canceled or delayed more than an hour. So here's basically just a filter function. And I entered this because one of the other questions is going to ask for a function that actually takes hours. So here,
Hmm.
how many minutes is this late? And then you can check for that. Then counts the number of canceled flights and the number of flights delayed by more than an hour. So here I basically use this function I defined up here to then do the count. Maybe I should also just run those codes. Let me just run the whole. So here we get our filtered data frame. Here we will get a summarized data frame for by destination. Um, And
Okay.
yeah, just in this example, I group by something. I wrote my function in a way that basically just summarizes, and I had left the group by outside. I didn't pass anything in, and I didn't do a count here because I basically wanted to use the group by. I think I don't know.
Yep.
Maybe a count would have been more straightforward. Why didn't I do a count? Now I'm trying to think. Um, yeah, I don't know.
What's the number of cancel flights? So, like, okay, so like to take a step back here, and I know, like I said, I don't want to slow us down because some of these like tidyverse ones are really straightforward. It's just getting at the concept of using like the double
Yeah,
braces and stuff like that, and you just have to figure out the logic to either filter or summarize. But the thing, and I need to spend some more time with this, and this is something that I read about a long time ago, like tidy evaluation versus data masking. And I just don't understand how with the filtering stuff, how data masking isn't an issue with the filter verb. Um, and maybe I just need to go back and reread about data masking and tidy evaluation. But I thought here with like the function for like um so like filter severe, like
yeah.
why arrival time and arrival delay, why we don't have to embrace those in this function, but in other functions we would have to. And it has to do
Oh,
with the filter verb.
yeah, but the reason is I was writing here the most lazy version, I think. So if I add the variable here to basically be explicit
Mm,
which variable it is. Here it assumes that df has a column called arrival time. So that, of course, makes it less robust, the function. So you could may add a
oh,
variable name here, but that's not what the question asks. So it was
yep.
like, it just wants you to do something very specific and assumes you have a certain data set. And that's how I interpreted it. I'm not saying that's the most beautiful function and the most robust function. So I was basically going by the minimal specification.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
no, and I wasn't critiquing your
no,
answer
I
to
understand.
here.
No, I also understand. And I heard that it's actually also good practice. So don't make your function very flexible if you don't need the flexibility,
Yeah.
right? So in the beginning, you just assume you want it to do exactly this thing and you make assumptions about the input, it's fine. And then if you want to write a function that's more flexible, right, you don't know what the data frame actually looks like, then you have to start thinking about how to change the logic of your function accordingly. But I think
Mm,
I don't know if anyone is ever watching these videos, but I think it's worth mentioning. Don't Premature optimization is the root of all evil, right? And that's kind of
hmm.
this function, making functions very flexible is like one of the things where you're like, oh, I want to get all the other cases that I might ever use. But if you never use the cases, no one is going to use it. It doesn't matter. You implement these things when you discover that your function suddenly needs to be more flexible. I think that's valuable to know.
Yeah, I think that's what it's getting at here is I don't know if that was an intentional design point of this exercise of like, hey, we talked about these concepts about embracing, but really the only thing that's going to dictate severeness is the arrival time and the arrival delay. Arrival time is just checking if it's an NA. So if you don't need to define a variable in an argument, then you don't need to use the double braces because that's
Yeah.
only if you are specifying it in an argument to make your function more flexible. So just like you said. So with my confusion, but like it always confuses me because this comes up in Shiny sometimes too, the data masking problem, and there's a different syntax to address it, and that's beside this conversation. But the tidy evaluation data masking stuff is stuff that like I know is there, but I don't know it enough to be like, this is exactly what you do in this specific case. So,
Yeah.
but
I think there's some questions coming up where it specifically asks,
yep.
yeah, here, user supplied, oh no, okay. So here's a council number. I don't know why I think I ended up on summarize because count, I would have to do the count on the on the column names, right? So and
Hmm.
the summarize gave me more flexibility to say, okay, I can do a group by and then summarize severe will work. Uh, with count, that would not work, I think. Then I really have to pass in some arguments.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? I don't know if that
Yep.
makes sense. That's, I think, why I went down that route. Then find all the flights that were canceled or delayed by more than a user supplied number of hours. So this is why I implemented already the hours argument up here. So really, there should be two different versions of the same functions, one without the hours, and just here, basically bigger than 60 minutes. But then down here, yeah, that's why I
Hmm.
already implemented that.
Hmm.
Okay, and then summarize whether to compute the minimum, mean, and maximum of a user-supplied variable, and that's what I was going by. So now you actually specify some variable. So the two inputs are data frame and variable, and then you do those double embrace um, to calculate that. And I can also just run this so that it works. And that is that function. Are there any questions about that? That seems it
No.
was very similar to an example they had in the chapter anyway.
Yeah, and it's the double embrace here. And
Yeah.
okay. All right. Because okay, so just so that I know this, this is tidy evaluation, not data masking. Because
Uh,
summarize is no wait, it's data masking, not
yeah, you have to look,
it's
but
data
you always
masking.
have to look at description to know which one of the two it is, I realize I don't understand the difference. So like, why is summarize using data masking? That's like, and filter is using data masking too, right? So I don't understand
Okay.
what those two terms explicitly mean.
Okay. So, okay. They had a really good example in here. They had a really, well, it was like, okay, they had a really good, like, was it an analogy? It was
I
something like looking at a tunnel or something.
No, that was for the embrace though. So the embrace is like looking through a tunnel into a variable. Like the embrace is just like, oh, where are we gonna look to figure out what the actual variable is,
Anything
right?
should figure out. Yep. Fortunately, this
I
is
can
easy to be
even
good.
look tunnel here. That's where
At compute with variables, tidy selections, select variables, common
okay, okay.
functions.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay, that makes sense. Tidy selection is like anything related to columns, kind of, right? And data masking is to compute. Okay. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Mhm. Just think about whether you can compute, so x plus 1, or select a through x,
Yeah.
or a colon x. Okay.
Yeah. I find
Okay.
this interesting because doesn't, for example, summarize literally do both because it computes the variable you provide, but it also only selects those because the other one, it wouldn't know how to compute anything because you don't provide a summary function. So it's kind of both, right? Am I the only
Mhm.
one who thinks this? So I don't know where the finer points of distinction here are. Um,
Yeah, that's why it gets confusing for me because, well, what I think with summarize, you start getting into iteration, which you could use across to compute. And so I think that's where it kind of confuses me, but that's not until the iteration chapter. Um, and maybe I'm overthinking this, but
yeah,
um, it just seems kind of because I'm coming from the situation where it used to be like you used to have to use like the bang bang and the unquo and quo stuff, but now they've simplified it with being able to use the syntax, and so I think I'm just getting mixed up with like what I knew in my previous knowledge versus what's available, and it's probably easier than I'm making it out to be. So,
yeah. Okay. So that was this function. Then the next one is a function that converts the user supplied variable that uses clock time. So like departure time and arrival time. So what that means, like it's literally spelling out in 4 digits the time into decimal time, which is the hours and the minutes divided by 60. So here is our clock time, which is one of the variable. And then I assume, this was not even necessary to do as a data frame function. I think could have just done a vector function, right? Yes,
mm,
that would
mm.
have been easier than what I'm doing here. That's also why I needed this part. Okay, well, doesn't matter. Here's standardist time. Yeah, maybe I should rewrite this. Maybe that's better to just. Oh no, but it's a supplied variable. No, it assumes no, it assumes a data frame. No, I'm all good. Sorry that I'm confusing here. So I do the mutate, then to basically have the mutate function have the correct name on the left-hand side instead of a derived name that I specify. I use this, what is this, the walrus operator. So you
Hmm.
have here the clock time. So I can assign this and then I divide. Basically, this is from the chapter about lubricate where you use what is this one called again?
The medulla.
Modulo versus modulus to get the two components. And so here, this gives me the hour component, and
Hmm.
this gives me the minute component. And then I divide the minutes by 60 here at the end. And that's
Hmm.
basically it. And it works.
Okay, so similar solution.
Actually,
Just
I
so
have
I
you
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you
Well, I
go
was
ahead.
just wondering about like, okay, so just so that I can, because this is an important point, the use of the use of the walrus operator. The reason why we're using the walrus operator here is because the user is supplying the name that they're going to create in mutate, right?
Yeah,
Because they're saying like clock time, they're providing that variable through an argument. And so because we're passing it into mutate, R is treating equals as a as assignment. So instead of assignment, we want it to be no, we're using a user supplied value to name it. I may be over explaining it, but
yeah.
that's the way I understand it.
Exactly. I mean, the to circumvent that, you could just call it decimal time and it creates a new variable. And I wasn't sure with the instruction. Here, it sounds like you actually convert the variable. So that's why I was like, oh, it sounds like in place, right? You take the variable and replace it with the standardized version. But you could just as well imagine to call this decimal time or something, then you don't need the walrus operator.
Yep, because it's going to treat it, and I'm just like reading through the book again, because equal means literal. It's going to take whatever's on the left-hand side as the literal naming convention that you want for it, but you in your function want the flexibility to give your user the ability to specify the name of the endpoint of that variable, which is going to come from the data set essentially because you're using clock time
Yeah.
in as the argument in three different places.
Yeah.
Hmm,
And I mean, you could even
interesting.
imagine that you call it like clock time decimal instead, right? And it would create a new variable to,
Mm, hmm,
right? So
interesting.
then it keeps the original variable and then creates a decimal version. But I mean, that's both fine. I think one of the things I noticed, and I'm not sure where it must be something that I don't understand how modulus and modulo work. It's like if you look at the conversion, here 5 hours and 17 minutes is converted into 5.25, which is incorrect
Mm,
because 25 would be 15 minutes. And they're all a little bit off. And I don't think it's rounding because if I put it in the calculator, let me see, 17 divided by 60. So it's 0.28, right? So even the rounding makes no sense here.
mm.
So I don't know why it gives me this weird result. So something might be wrong here, and I don't understand what the mistake is. Do you have?
I one time went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand what the Modolo does. They use the examples of clock time when they do this,
Yeah,
but I didn't have the background enough to fully understand it outside of like it's just pulling out the hour, you know.
yeah. One, I
Yeah.
mean, one gives you the integer, right? Or yeah, the integer. That's the this one, and this gives you the remainder.
Yep.
So but I mean, the remainder, this should give me 17 for the first example, right?
Hmm.
If I delete all the stuff, let me just delete it and see what we get. Um, and then run this again. Oh, there's something wrong. Schedule departure time, 5:15. Oh, the sixth day, sorry. Um, and then,
There's time.
oh, I'm doing something. Why is this returning
100 because the remainder 100.
5:15? Oh, there's some mistake in my, why does this,
Okay, let
oh,
me take a look here.
maybe I just
No.
didn't run it. That makes no sense.
Oh, clock time, remainder. Do you have to divide by 60 when you do this division? Or when you do this remainder
No,
division?
you want the remainder, right? So you divide by 100, so the 100s go away. And
Yep.
then, no, yeah. So the 100 is go away, and the remainder is just the 17.
Yep.
I'm doing something wrong here. Huh.
Well, wait a minute. I think you have to, do you have to divide by 60 though to convert it into seconds? Because it's not, because the 0.17 would be, well, no.
I mean, if I just use this and use 517 divided by 100, it gives me 17, right?
15.
So what
Yeah.
is not, am I not updating by function? Is something just, is this a weird function? Standardized time, but it's spelled right, right?
Oh, this should all
Yeah,
work.
and I ran it all. Oh, this is so weird. I don't understand.
Because I have divided by 60 when you do that division.
Yeah, I mean, you need to do that then to get the fraction, right?
Yeah, to get the fraction. So it gives you the remainder, which you want, which is 17. Hmm.
Let me just restart R and see if that fixes anything. No, it's still the same result.
Are we actually looking at the right? Wait a minute. Are we actually looking at the right column? Because
Scheduled departure time. Scheduled
because you
departure time.
created this new
Oh,
one
I
called
created. Oh, sorry. That's
that we were
right.
looking at the wrong column there.
Because I created this. But okay, then that's just yes. I'm sorry. This is right.
No, that's fine. It's because the mutate will always add it at the end of the column.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just read it. That's what it was. Yeah, good catch.
So you were
Yeah,
right.
now, but
You're
here
right.
it gives me 15.
15
Why does it give me 15 here?
clock time.
Is this
So
is this a weird? Does it have to do? Okay, I'm just gonna check now. Decimal. Oh, sorry.
that's what I was wondering when you were doing that in quotations. I was wondering if that was messing with it.
And then what's the thing in mutate that keeps only dot keep? Is that right? No.
Yep. Uh,
Keep. No.
mutate is a drop.
Oh, dot keep. Okay. Uh,
Oh,
and which used, unused, none. Used, right? Oh, sorry. I have to.
mutate. 29, there it is. So 15, 29, 40. So there you're getting the
But why
correct
does it
remainder.
change the scheduled departure time? Oh,
Scheduled.
wait a minute. Maybe no, but I never assign. I'm so confused right now. Lights.
Departure time.
Oh, the scheduled departure time is the departure time and scheduled departure time are not the same. I'm so silly. So now,
Oh, okay.
so that was the error. I assumed that no, here's the correct. Everything is all right. I'm so sorry. I took
No,
us
that's
on
fine.
this. Oh my God. Okay. I assumed the departure time and scheduled departure time were the same, but of course they're not. Okay. So everything is working the way it is supposed to
Sweet.
be. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just a lot of different columns. But no, I think it kind of clarified this a little bit more about like using the walrus operator. And I mean, like, it's just the calculation, but the big
Yeah.
concepts are like when do you use embrace and using the walrus. And so I think we got the general concepts. So
Okay, and then there was this question about listing all the arguments, and I didn't go all through it, but basically you
hmm
would look at the definition. So rename with, let's just go question, rename. I don't know what, oh, sorry. And then you can see in the description, for example, those, what are the three dots called again? That argument name, whatever that is.
I just called 3 dots.
Yeah, they have some fancy name. Uh, Here's for tidy select, except for rename, but for rename with, it's an additional argument, so it's different. So it's not the three dots, but the dot calls that you provide.
Mm.
That's tidy select.
Oh, okay.
So so it's just you look at the
Interesting.
documentation and it tells you here explicitly with the argument names if it's a tidy select or data masking. So maybe slice min is even more interesting.
Mm.
I guess this is just to encourage you to actually look at documentation of
How do
your.
you select and data masking if you use order by? Wait, no. Order by is data masking. Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, here, yeah,
But then they also have
and then
data masking
the
and wait
wait by,
by.
yeah,
But the dot by and the by is tidy select
yeah, because you select certain
and
columns.
columns. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes
so
sense.
that's how you're
Okay.
going to group it. So that's why it's tidy select. And the other ones are
Mm.
calculating something, right? So the order by operate orders based on that variable, so it has to arrange it in some way. So that's why it's data masking. And the weight by, it actually gives sampling weights. So in that case, it does some other calculation. So
Mm. Mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm. Okay, that's cool. Okay.
Basically just encouraging you to figure out where you would figure that out. And we're almost at time too. So I don't know if you want to just stop here.
I mean, the plotting one was pretty straightforward. I mean, it was just basically like create a scatter plot, just iterate this function. So I don't think that was too challenging. But then there was like, what's this one that generalized the function? This one was interesting. I mean, the only point that I have here is just the use of pick. I
Yeah.
did not know about pick, um, which I thought was really useful. Um, but it's just encouraging to use pick so you can expand into multiple variables instead of just one variable. So, but yeah, I mean, unless you have any other discussion about like the exercise, the draw the scatter plot, but I think it was just pretty straightforward of like
That
create a
was
scatter
pretty
plot and dump it
straightforward.
in.
The most important thing here was where it's using also the example with the embrace to basically generate a label, and then you add the label here. I forgot to actually add the title. This
That's
label.
yeah. I saw that. That was interesting. I didn't do that with my answer to this. But it is interesting to see that if you are using ggplot2 code and you want to add additional like you want to add additional like geomes or labs or whatever, you would use the plus rather than the pipe. And so I thought
Oh yeah.
that was like an interesting like nuance that you needed to remember. But
Oh, you need to, when you get the output, right? Yeah, if you want to further modify the ggplot object that you get from your function, yeah, that's
yeah, if you
important to
wanted like
consider.
theme minimal, like you would do like so with your scatter plot
Yeah.
here, you have your scatter plot function. If you wanted to add theme minimal, you would have to use a plus and then theme
Yeah.
minimal
Where it's minimal.
or any theme. It doesn't have to be theme minimal,
Yeah.
but and
Oh,
then you would run it.
yeah.
I
Okay.
think, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Here it worked. And if I would do type, then it should give you an error. Yeah. So you have to be
Hmm.
careful and think what the function actually returns. One thing I noticed, so in the when you do this nglu, you also have to embrace it because there's actually a
Mm.
typo in the instructions. So if you go to the plot functions and go to labeling, and in this example, see the first one has an embrace with two, and the
Oh.
second one has only one. So this would give you an error, I'm pretty sure. Like, I mean, we
Huh.
can even copy and run it. So no, it works. Why does this work with width? It shouldn't work.
Okay. This is what I think it is. Okay, so your var is a variable
Yeah.
that you're using, a variable name. So I think this is dealing with data masking, but the bin width is just a value. So it's like I don't know if you're used to like the glue
Oh, yeah.
package and the glue function. So bin is not a variable that you're specifying from the data set. It is just a string that you would like to add or to convert it to a
I
string. So that's why it's a single.
see. Yes, yes, yes. It's a variable that's separate from the, it's not a column, it's a variable that's also provided. Okay, I get it. Yeah, cool. That's good.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Some of
important
these,
to keep that in mind. Okay.
some of these were tricky, but they were very beneficial. So all right, cool. I think we lost DJ, which is okay. But do you have any other questions or anything? I thought this was a good chapter. Um, there were a couple things missing, I thought, but most of it was good to see like how to functionize dplyr verbs and plots and doing like transformation operations, which is great. So, all right, cool.
Yeah,
Well, I appreciate you.
it's
Oh, go
yeah, it's
ahead. I don't want to cut you
incredibly
off.
sorry, incredibly powerful to know how to forward the variable names of the data frames. That makes it so much more flexible. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I mean, like, and I mean, like, at the end, and I think I'm probably going to read some more of this. Like, I mean, I suggest reading the programming with dplyr. I've read that before. There's also some vignettes with like programming with ggplot because that's a lot of the stuff that I do is like we have like standardized like plots we want to create. So I create a lot of like plot functions. The only thing that I run into as an issue is like a lot of the time it's just iterations of plots and it's the same function over and over and over again. This might get to iteration. At some point, I totally understand like if you repeat yourself, you should write a function, or if you repeat yourself multiple times using the same function, you should iterate. How far do you really go? Because there are times like where I'll be like creating a report and it's like you call this function multiple times and it's just easier to do like a code chunk, call the same variable, code chunk, minor variation, da 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 da. But then it's like, well, you could just wrap this up into some like iteration and do like 10 different plots and then just like subset it. But at the same time, you're sitting there like, okay, what do I do? It's just, it's more explicit in my report if I keep doing like the same thing over and over again rather than like run it all and then subset. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's where I kind of get at with this design thing of like, okay, I understand DRY, but when it comes to like practical reading terms and you have this big long list of plots you've created, just seems like you're creating so much extra work than rather than just actually repeating yourself. So
Yeah, yeah. I think it is. You need to take it with a grain of salt, right? And it makes it more obscure. If you wrap everything in a function, then suddenly it becomes less obvious why things are different in the first place. Where it's kind of nice to see. Yeah,
yeah, and it's kind of it and DRY is a computer science concept, you know, and system design and stuff. And then at the same time, like, well, when it comes to analysis, sometimes you just, you know, you want to see the same thing when you're actually writing the code and then you can run it. So that's my only critique, but that's going to get at iteration, which we'll talk about next week. So, um, cool. Well, I appreciate you staying a little extra past to answer any questions and stuff like that. And so I'll see you next week. I'll be leading iteration and have a good rest of your week.
you too. See you.